You are listening to Lighthearted, the official podcast of the United States Lighthouse Society. My name is Jeremy D'Entremont. Welcome. My co-host today is Cindy Johnson, Secretary for Friends of Portsmouth Harbor Lighthouses. Hi, Cindy.
Hi, Jeremy.
Today is October 29th, 2023, and this is episode 249 of Lighthearted. Happy almost Halloween.
Happy almost Halloween and Dia de los Muertos.
Well, thank you. Gracias. We are in, of course, the Bluefish Boulevard recording studios, and we're actually surrounded by my wife Charlotte's Dia de los Muertos collection here of little Mexican figurines and stuff. She's been collecting them a long time. It's almost like a museum here. So I like it, too. So on to today's episode. And today, it's kind of unusual. We're simply going to be talking about visiting lighthouses and everything that makes that so enjoyable. We have two interesting interviews coming up. First, we need to take care of some very important business.
Yes, we do. We want to send a special wish to one of our faithful listeners. November 4th will be the 11th birthday of a big fan of lighthouses. So happy birthday, Guinevere.
Yeah, happy birthday, Gwyn. Her mom tells me they live in Kentucky, and Gwyn has seen about 15 lighthouses from Virginia to Florida. Her first lighthouse was Ocracoke in North Carolina, which Charlotte and I just visited a couple of weeks ago. Mm-hmm. She has been to some of my favorite lighthouses like Ponce Inlet in St. Augustine in Florida, Tybee Island, and St. Simon's Island in Georgia. Her mom says they are planning to visit Michigan and New England next year.
Well, maybe if Gwyn and her mom come to New England next year, we can give them a tour of Portsmouth Harbor Lighthouse right here in New Hampshire.
Yeah, I hope so. If the footbridge out to the lighthouse gets rebuilt by next year, that's in the works.
Nice, yes.
I hear it's happening very soon, so we can hope.
Good.
Of course, there's just one more thing we need to say to Gwyn.
Of course. Keep a good light, Gwyn.
Very good. So is there anything else you'd like to add about late October by any chance, Cindy?
Well, yes. My mom's 80th birthday was on the 25th.
So
Happy belated birthday, Debbie. /mom.
Very good. All right. Now that we've taken care of all that important business, let's get to our first interview. So help me out, Cindy.
Sure, Jeremy. The guests in the first interview today are Anne Fox and her daughter Val. Along with Anne's husband and another younger daughter, the family has been sailing from their home port in Stamford, Connecticut, on a mission to photograph all the lighthouses in Long Island Sound.
Anne is originally from Ukraine and has been in the U.S. for 11 years. Her daughter Val was born 3 years before they left Ukraine. In addition to their sailing adventures in Long Island Sound, the family has traveled widely in New York State and elsewhere, and they have a website detailing their travels.
Yes, the website is aswegoplaces.com. They also have an Instagram account at @as_wegoplaces and a TikTok account, which is at @aswegoplaces.
Yeah. You know, this conversation was really a lot of fun, and I think people are going to enjoy hearing it. So let's listen to my conversation with Anne and Val now. I am speaking with Anne Fox and her daughter Val. And first of all, thank you so much for being on the podcast, both of you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
So, Anne, you contacted me, I think it must be a few weeks ago now, about a family project. You sail as a family, you do a lot of sailing, and you've been sailing to see all the lighthouses in Long Island Sound. I've been discovering that your family website, which is aswegoplaces.com, is really quite extensive, and you've done a lot of traveling, even beyond the lighthouses and so forth. So it's great to see that. We'll talk a little bit about that too. Also, something I've learned lately is that you're from Ukraine. Is that correct?
Originally, yes. It's been 11 years since we came to the United States, but yep, originally, and that's where my daughter was born as well. So.
And you live in Stamford, Connecticut now, is that right?
That's where our sailboat is. We are in upstate New York.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
When we bought the sailboat, we wanted to just keep it on Hudson, but the first year we realized that not much to do here. So we moved her to Long Island Sound, and that's when all the fun started.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, when we came to the United States, we got traveling, and that's when we started seeing all those lighthouses in Maine, Florida,
Mm-hmm.
California. So yeah, it has always been our interest, but we've never been able to actually explore them from the sea independently from any cruises or anything like that. So definitely the passion started with our sailboat.
Yeah, I can understand that. When did that start, and what prompted you to start it?
Well, to start from the beginning, we got the sailboat in 2020. That was our COVID purchase. The time when we have crazy decisions. So that's when we bought the sailboat with no sailing experience whatsoever, except for my husband got some lessons in sailing nearby, but with no wind because we don't get so much wind here. So we got the sailboat, and next year we decided to move it to Long Island Sound. And I was wondering what could prompt us, what's the incentive to sail more? Like we needed goals, we needed to see something new, not just islands and beaches, something really like with history. And that's when we realized how many lighthouses there are on Long Island Sound, and that became like after we saw maybe a couple of them, I decided, hey, we need to see all of them. We need to sail to all of them. And that's a great goal for us to sail more and explore more. So somehow that's how the idea was born.
So how many have you seen? How many of the lighthouses on Long Island Sound have you seen?
We have seen 23, and
Uh-huh.
that's just Long Island Sound. So I don't count the Atlantic Ocean or anything beyond that. So that's just Long Island or Hudson as well.
Yeah.
So
Uh-huh. Okay.
just Long Island Sound, we saw 23. We've documented 22 of them, and I think we have a few more. Our goal is to see Montauk Lighthouse, but
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it counts as Long Island Sound. Really, I think
Oh, it does. Well, it's right at the entrance, basically.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
basically on the edge, but we haven't seen that all from the sea. We've seen it, we've traveled to it, but never saw it from the sea.
Yeah. Oh, it's one of the great ones. And Fire Island too. Have you gone to that on land, Fire Island?
Go
Hmm.
to that, but not sailed. Exactly
Okay.
that. So I'm not
Yeah.
counting those that we did not sail to because that wouldn't be like the goal of sailing.
Yeah. Now, if I could ask you, Val, I think you were involved in putting together the web page for the lighthouse visits. Is that right?
Yeah, a lot
Uh-huh.
of like photographs and just in general.
I've got it open in front of me right now. Are the photographs, are those your photographs on there,
Well, some
Val?
of them, yes, we
Some
have
of
a
them?
camera and I take some of them, or
Mm-hmm.
some of them are from iPhone too.
Uh-huh. It's a really nicely done web page, very organized, and I recommend that people check it out. So I mentioned it before, but the website again is aswegoplaces.com, and then you can navigate. It's like sort of like a blog, right? There are various entries on your travels, and the lighthouse page, Long Island Sound Lighthouses, is one of them. Very easy to find. Val, were you involved in the all the other pages on the site as well, putting those together?
A little bit, yeah.
Is something you enjoy working on a website like that?
Yeah, especially with my mom.
Hmm. It's a great family project. I think every aspect of it, the travels, to various places, including the lighthouses, and putting the website together. What a nice family activity. And it's not just the two of you. It's your husband and other children as
We
well.
yeah, we have a little one. She's 7 years old, so she's not as much involved. She's just tolerating all our trips,
Hmm.
doing her best. And my husband is responsible for driving us everywhere while while I'm working on planning the trip.
Yeah, I know what that's like. A lot
Yep.
of driving on these trips. So let me ask both of you, of the lighthouses you've seen, and we're just talk about Long Island Sound for now, but do you have any favorites among those lighthouses?
Do you have a favorite?
Yeah, the Great Captain Island Lighthouse. It's pretty close. It's around like a 40
Oh,
minute
yes.
sail. Yeah, and just enjoy going there. It's like very familiar.
Uh-huh. People can't see it because we're on a podcast. They're not. We're speaking on Zoom right now, And from my background, I put Great Captain Island Lighthouse up behind me. So I must have somehow known, like intuitively, that was your favorite one. It's a beautiful place.
It's close to Stamford, so it's like close to an hour of sailing there. And that's the first lighthouse where we dropped the anchor.
Yeah.
And Val and I swam to it from the sailboat, and it's just gorgeous. The first experience, I guess that's why it's so nice to remember it, and that's why it's in our hearts.
It's really a nice place, and I first visited there when the lighthouse was in very rough shape, and now it's in good shape now. That the town of Greenwich does a good job of it, and there's a 9/11 memorial right by the lighthouse as well, which is nice.
We swam to it once, and also we took dinghy and walked around the island. That's the beauty of having a sailboat and being able to anchor next to all those lighthouses, because usually all the lighthouse keepers or workers are very friendly when they see people just coming from a sailboat and asking for water or something like that. They're always very welcoming, and that's what we have been doing.
Any of the others that spring to mind?
We like Sands Point Lighthouse too, because it's in the place that inspired like East Egg and Great Gatsby, and that's one of like my favorite books. So I think it's great to see all the houses there and then have that lighthouse there too. It's very beautiful.
Wasn't the site of where Sands Point Lighthouse was and the mansion next to it, wasn't it owned by William Randolph Hearst for a while? Remembering that right?
We know that the Great Gatsby book was inspired by this whole harbor.
Yeah.
And that's why we sailed there, and trying to imagine how that he would see the green light at the other side of the harbor. So it's a great place to be. And we love Port Washington as well. And that's what we usually stay at with our sailboat. But yeah, that's a very great place to sail to. You cannot approach it from the ground easily.
Right. Well, Sands Point, I think, is in a very private residential area. They don't let people in there.
You cannot get close to it unless you are seeing it from water.
The lighthouse where you have your sailboat, where it's based, is Stamford Harbor. That's not exactly the most attractive lighthouse these days.
It is not, but we still love it. We have seen it in the sunrise, sunset, bad weather, cloudy weather in all its glory. So we got to really love it as well. And it's our first lighthouse as well. And we anchored next to it just a few weekends ago. So we still love it. It does need renovation, I know, but it's very pretty all the same. So.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you feel that way. They all have their own stories to tell and their own beauty in their own way, for sure. So just a little bit more about your other travels. How widely have you traveled on your sailboat?
So the most we did on her still has been our trip from Port Jefferson up to Albany. So we did all the way around the Manhattan, up Hudson River, and it took us about 4 days. And it was our very first trip. So just when we bought her, we didn't have much time because Val needed to go to school. So it was like late August or early September. So we had to make it. Didn't have any guidance or anything like that. So it was our first trip ever with not much experience. So not much fear as well. I'm have more fear now than I had then because I know much more. But yeah, with the toddler and a little kitten. So it was like a crazy trip, but that's still the most we did on that sailboat in a row, so in one trip. The other trip that we also did was to Mystic. It was magical. We were able to stay at a marina that's also the museum, the
Mystic Seaport.
Yeah, the seaport. So we stayed 2 nights there. We were able to see all the ships and boats at night. And it's just when you're staying at a sailboat in the museum overnight. It's just I highly recommend that experience as well. So that was another pretty long trip, but not as much as the first one we took.
Mm-hmm. So do you share the skipper duties, the captain duties with your husband, or how does that work?
She does.
Yeah.
Val does.
Val, are you the captain, Val?
She's the skipper.
Yeah.
I'm responsible for making everyone fed. So for food, I'm cleaning as well. But
Yeah.
Val is helping with the sails, and she's also at the wheel all the time. So she's the one who is much better at sailing than I am.
So I guess you love sailing, Val, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. What do you think do you see yourself doing a lot of sailing in your future?
Yeah, for sure. Especially over the summers. I mean, we're on our sailboat all the time.
Uh-huh.
So I kind of have no choice. And then when I grow up, I wouldn't want to like forget sailing and that experience. So I'll continue doing that, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't sound like you're going to forget. I think you're going to be doing it all your life for sure. You have traveled widely beyond the sailing you just talked about, but I wonder if you could just mention one or two places, maybe in this country or elsewhere, that are like your favorite places you've ever seen.
Oh, that's so tough. Which one is yours?
Well, we only spent one day there on like a transfer flight, but I really like the San Miguel Island. We were flying back from like Portugal like this past summer, and we transferred flights there. And we were there for like the day, and the weather was really nice. It was like foggy, and a little rainy too. And that would be a really nice place to like sail as well if we were ever doing like a big transatlantic trip.
We spent about 5 days in Lisbon, and then
Uh-huh.
we flew back to New York, and we had to do to change the planes. And I did my best to find the best place for layover, and ended up with those islands in the middle of Atlantic Ocean, and they are just magical. They are tiny, they are very volcanic, so you get to see all the craters and all the volcanic seaside, all of that, and it's just very great place. So
Mhm.
we were very excited that we were able to see it.
So do you consider yourselves lighthouse nuts now at this point? And I use that term affectionately because I'm a lighthouse nut too.
Absolutely. I wish I had time to document more lighthouses beyond Long Island Sound, because we've seen a lot. We've done quite a few lighthouse cruises in California, in Maine, in Florida, and we're also going back to Biscayne National Park. Is that?
In Florida. Mhm.
Yes, and they have quite a few lighthouses there as well, and we'll make sure to see most of them. So we've seen a lot, but the thing is that unless you document them, you forget you remember the experience, but not the name or the history behind the place. So my goal is to document more of our lighthouse journeys than we are currently doing. So
Mm-hmm.
probably this summer or winter.
I'm just imagining maybe a book in your future that your family could put out, a book on sailing to see
Oh my God,
America's lighthouses.
that's the goal. The long
Really? Is it really?
Oh, I love writing, and that's
Yeah.
what I'm doing for a living. So I would love to put together a book. It's just you get so many hours a day. Like it's for me, we don't even unpack anymore because we don't have time. We just unpack and pack at the same day, so that's at saving time. And
Yeah.
fitting in documenting into that schedule, and also with 2 kids going to school, us two full-time working, all of that. So but definitely as soon as we have time, we'll start planning a book or something like that, and I'll make sure we have notes and some records before that.
I hope so. I'm looking for, I want a signed copy as soon as you get that done. Looking forward to that.
Yes.
So I just have one final question for both of you. Okay. And this one's for bonus points. All right. And that question is, what has been your favorite thing about your project to sail to see the lighthouses of Long Island Sound?
For me, I think it's the variety. Like you don't think of how different lighthouses can be, and then you have all the pictures in one place and all the names. You look back on it and you see that they're all have completely different in like their style that they were built because of the time period and the location, and then also the things that we did there. So there's a lot of variety that you can have from this experience.
I think what Val mentioned, the best thing with that for us was that every trip is an adventure. So it's not just seeing several lighthouses in one trip. It's just every lighthouse we do something there. So we either spend the night on anchor, or we fish, or we swim, or we do something like something similar to that. And it's all different. Sometimes we meet a sunset with the lighthouse. Sometimes we board on that island and walk around. Sometimes we get to know people. Like it was that Sheffield Island lighthouse. We just landed on it, and it's actually also private property, but we went ahead and asked them if we could just explore, and they were so welcoming, and they just showed us around. And it's always like, even meeting those people is also a different kind of adventure. So every lighthouse for us is a different memory with some kind of absolutely unique adventure. So I think that's the best thing about this project.
I love what both of you said. And, I think that's why so many of us love lighthouses in general. It is an adventure. Every time you go to see a new lighthouse, it's a new adventure. And you don't know, it might be the people you meet, it might be the spectacular location or the history behind it, but it's all an adventure. So I just love hearing about this so much. Anne and Val, I hope we can stay in touch, and I want to find out more about your travels in the future. And I'm really looking forward to that book. You've got to do that. Thank you so much for spending time with me today. I appreciate it so much. Thank you.
Thank you
for having us.
A reminder that you can see photos and read more about the family's travels at aswegoplaces.com. Their social media links are also on the site.
Doing this interview got me thinking about why I love lighthouses so much. Of course, sure, I find the history fascinating, but after all these years, it still feels like a special adventure every time I visit a new lighthouse, or even when I return to the ones I've visited many times. So this really gets to the basics of why visiting lighthouses is such a great hobby.
One of my favorites.
Well, me too. So let's go to our second interview for today. Josh Liller is the historian and collections manager at Jupiter Inlet Lighthouse and Museum in Florida.
Josh is the co-author of the book 5,000 Years on the Loxahatchee and author of the book The Florida Lighthouse Trail. He's written many articles on lighthouse history for the U.S. Lighthouse Society's journal The Keeper's Log and other publications. He also lectures on history topics, including the Civil War.
Yeah, I first met Josh a few years ago when I interviewed him at Jupiter Inlet Lighthouse in Florida. He was a great host when I visited. Last month, Josh made his first ever trip up the coast to New England to see some of our lighthouses. I spent a day with him around our home city here, Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and then he headed up the coast of Maine. Josh is a historian who has a great curiosity about the history of these places and a tremendous eye for detail. I loved hearing his observations on this trip. So let's listen to my conversation with Josh Liller now. I'm talking this afternoon with my friend Josh Liller, who is in Florida, who is the historian for the Jupiter Inlet Lighthouse. And I just saw Josh recently because, Josh, you were up here in my neck of the woods just a few weeks ago. Today, I'd love to talk about your experience of Maine. And also, of course, you saw the New Hampshire seacoast as well. So anyway, thanks for doing this today, Josh.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. And it was my first time in my entire life ever to get up to New England and to see Maine. I'd heard so much about, and wonderful as a big fan of lighthouses.
To me, Maine has some of the best ones. It certainly has some of the oldest ones. New England in general has the oldest ones in the country. So let's talk about what you saw and what your impressions were. So let's see, you flew into Boston, right?
Flew into Boston. My impressions there are that the traffic is nightmarish.
Yes.
I would
agree.
compare it to a bad day in Atlanta or Miami.
Yeah.
With streets that are more hair-raising because they're so much older and were originally built with probably a lot less traffic.
So then where'd you go from Boston?
I went up to the Portsmouth area and saw you the next day.
Mm-hmm. And we had a fun day doing stuff in the Portsmouth area together. I took you to see Portsmouth Harbor Light, but that's not at its best right now, it's not its most accessible because our footbridge out to the lighthouse was washed away in December and hasn't been rebuilt yet. But at least you got to see it.
Yeah, and I'll definitely have to come back and actually get the climate. Portsmouth Harbor was really neat to just be able to see the Harbor Light and Whaleback and Wood Island Life-Saving Station from so many different angles around the harbor.
Yeah, there's a lot of history around here. And let's see, we did some other things that day. It was a hot day.
Yeah, well, unseasonably warm today for you and unseasonably warm a month ago for you. At least I didn't bring any Florida weather with me this time.
Right. But yeah, it probably didn't seem all that hot to you being living in Florida, but to us it was pretty warm for September and kind of humid. And one of the things we did that day is we went to the submarine Albacore that's now on dry ground. One of the many submarines built at the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard. It's from the early 1950s. It's open to the public. We're the only ones there at the time we were there late that afternoon. It was kind of understandable because it was really hot. And to go in a submarine on a hot day is interesting. And you stuck it out longer than I did. I had to get out of there and get some air after a while.
Yeah, but the temperature and just watching the head and not tripping or hitting my head on anything is tricky because I'm a pretty tall guy.
Yeah, well, I'm not a really tall guy, but I smacked my head pretty good going on the submarine. I was almost seeing stars for a few minutes there. But that must have been interesting for you, certainly.
Yeah, that was a neat little bit of history. I've only been to maybe like 2 other submarines before that I could actually go inside. So that was really neat to just kind of go in there and kind of see how it's laid out. Some of those bunks, I don't know how people manage on there. As for the fact that nobody else was there, I think everybody else was at the beach.
Either that or home and air conditioning. But yeah, those bunks are unbelievable. There's pipes right over the top bunks in some cases where you'd have to sleep on your back, and if you raised your head at all with it, without sort of sliding out, you'd smack your head on the pipes. So we went to a couple of forts also. We saw Fort Foster and Fort McClary, both of which have beautiful views.
Yeah, Fort McClary was pretty neat just to see that colonial blockhouse kind of style of the fort. It was a shame to see so many forts around the Portsmouth Harbor area in such state of disrepair that they're, so abandoned. And I think just the maintenance costs, because these Endicott era concrete fortifications are so many places, what they've, in many cases been abandoned since World War II, and they don't have the I think the visual appeal that a lot of the masonry forts have to people, and a lot of times they never really fired at anybody in a war, so they just kind of fall by the wayside, and people don't have the love and interest to them.
Yeah, sadly you're right. I don't want to speak ill of my home state here, New Hampshire, but you mentioned Fort McClary. That is Maine State Park, and that's maintained pretty well. But yeah, the local forts here, Fort Constitution, which has tremendous history, and Fort Stark down the road from there, they're in pretty sad shape. So hopefully something will be happening with those. After you left Portsmouth, you headed up the coast. What was your next stop?
My first stop the next morning was Cape Nettic at Nubble.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of the best moments of the trip, is the way that the park there on the headland is a little higher than the town right behind it, and then the island is a little higher than the park itself. So when I first drove into the park, seeing the lighthouse, which is not that big, but it creates this kind of Lord of the Rings effect of magnifying the height. It just looms over the horizon, and that, especially first thing in the morning with a kind of a low sun but a little foggy background, really was a picturesque moment.
I know exactly what you mean. I can picture that easily. I've driven in there so many times. It's always special driving in there, the way like you said, the island and lighthouse kind of loom in front of you, even though it's a small lighthouse. It's the light's over 80 feet above. Well, it's about 80 feet above the water, I believe. It's on a rugged little island, rocky island. Anyway, so you went to the Nubble, and of course, a lot of listeners, I'm sure, know you view it across the water a couple of 100 feet, and it's tantalizing. You can't quite get there, and a lot of people think that's kind of part of its appeal. It's got sort of a mystery to it. You can gaze at it from across that narrow channel, but hardly anybody actually gets on the island.
It's a great example of so close yet so far.
So where did you go next?
after seeing just a kind of a few brief stops along the way at various little monuments and oddities and historic homes just to kind of sightsee from the road, I stopped into near Cape Elizabeth and the good view of the Twin Lights there on the waterfront, and then drove over into the neighborhood for a slightly closer look, but not without trespassing anybody's yard.
Yeah, you got to be careful. You got to make it pretty quick if you drive in there.
The view of the lighthouses was nice, but then also just the standing on the point there, the basalt rocks were just a unique little piece of geology on that particular spot, especially the way they start crumbling, and it puts me in the mind of this gigantic tree that had fallen over and all the bark is crumbling to dust.
Yeah. Did you go to the Two Lights Lobster Shack?
I did not. It wasn't open for lunch yet. I went down, got lunch in town in South Portland, and then went over to Bug Light. I saw the little historical society museum there, which it was free, so certainly worth for a short little visit.
Yeah.
Saw the Bug Light. The harbor was busy with a lot of sailboats and other boats passing around. That's another one there with the Portland Harbor scene. You can look at from one lighthouse and see the other lighthouses, and then you've got the forts across to the other side on the island, and it's neat to see kind of go from one, look at the other, and then go to that one, look back where you've been.
That's a great area, and you got Spring Point Ledge Light almost next door to Bug Light, which is actually Portland Breakwater Light, but everybody calls it Bug Light. Yeah.
Yeah, and I saw the Liberty ship monument, so that was interesting to see just how much I knew there had been a lot of Liberty ships. I didn't know they were specifically, so many of them had been built right there.
Yeah. Oh, it's tremendous history. Off the top of my head, I'm trying to remember. I think it was over 250 Liberty ships built there during the war.
And the big model of it to help put a little scale into it.
Yeah.
And to be standing there, in the park that used to be the berths where they were building them.
Yeah.
And then I did go down to the Spring Point Ledge Lighthouse and walk out on that breakwater. The water was cooperative, but it's not an easy walk out there.
No.
The boulders are a little uneven. Fortunately, fairly dry though. And as someone who lives in South Florida, walking on granite those are some hard rocks to walk on, and my feet at the end of it are like, what are you doing to us?
Yeah. It is tricky. And again, I used to bring tours to that area, and after a while, I stopped bringing them out on there. I won't go into details, but there were a couple of incidents. So I always warn people, if you go there, take your time, watch every step you take, because it's easy to be looking at something else as you take a wrong step on those uneven stones.
Yeah, and it was neat to see a caisson lighthouse up close like that for the first time. Sad to see that some people occasionally vandalize the caisson. But
yeah, it's the only caisson, so-called spark plug type lighthouse that I know of that you can walk to. It was offshore when it was built, but then they built the breakwater out to it in the early 1950s. So that makes it pretty unique. And so while you're in that area, you also went to Portland Headlight, of course, right?
I went down to Portland Head Lighthouse. I've seen it in the walls of A Million Red Lobsters and had to see it in person. And so that was great to visit such a historic and unique lighthouse. One of the things that fascinated me with the exhibit is that they have the second order lens on display, but only half of it.
Yeah, I think some of it was damaged. It was moved around quite a bit and storage, and I think some of it may have been lost, and lost to damage somewhere along the way. At least something was saved, which is better than nothing. But that's a pretty special place. You probably walked along the fence and got that iconic view looking over at the lighthouse and keeper's house, that the one you see on the Red Lobsters and all the postcards and everything else. Yeah. So on this trip, you actually visited what I think are possibly the two most visited, if you consider visiting Noble, you don't quite get to it, but the two most visited and photographed lighthouses in the world, I think. Portland Head with about 1.2 million visitors a year, Noble with about 500,000, although I think Cape Hatteras is right in that same neighborhood too, so they're probably neck and neck for second. But I don't know of any others that get those kind of numbers.
Yeah, I probably not. And certainly the day I was there, it was a Friday afternoon, and the park was hopping. It was quite busy.
Yeah, there's often cruise ships in Portland Harbor this time of year in the fall, doing New England cruises, especially actually a little bit later, seeing foliage and stuff. You weren't there. You were a little early for fall foliage,
I
but
did get to see one of the cruise ships coming in, and I got a photo of the cruise ship coming in with Ram Island Ledge Lighthouse in the background.
oh, cool.
I was
That's it.
happy to get that.
Yeah, yeah. So let's see. So what else did you do? You were actually in Maine for Maine Open Lighthouse Day, of course,
Right.
right?
And then so we mentioned that I was kind of a little warm and muggy the first couple of days I was up there, and then as I get done seeing the lighthouse, I was going to explore a little bit more of the park and the old fort there. And I look up into the sky, and the sky is turning like absolutely like pitch black, and
Ugh.
it's 2 hours before sunset. And I'm like, am I back in Florida again? And it was indeed, this massive thunderstorm rolling through. And there was a second wave later that night that even was powerful enough to knock out the DirecTV in my hotel room. And this is what I expect in South Florida for a thunderstorm night in Maine.
We've had quite a bit of that this past year. It was a pretty warm summer, humid days, and a lot of rain actually the last few months. Yeah.
So I went up to Brunswick and stayed the night there. And then I was to start Maine Lighthouse Day. I started at first thing at 9 o'clock when the first one opened there at the doubling point light in Aerosick. I was glad I got that one first thing in the morning, because later that afternoon I had people sending me text messages about, did you fall into the river while you were up in Maine? And part of the boardwalk had apparently collapsed a few hours after I was there.
Yeah, the footbridge out to the lighthouse. Yeah, I think there was something like 11 people who sustained injuries in that. So I was really sorry to see that, because I know
Yeah.
the people there quite well. The Spencers, who started the effort there, to the Friends group, and then the McLeans, Karen and Dan McLean, who are kind of running it now and living in the keeper's house. They're really good people, and I know obviously they wouldn't have had so many people on there if they thought there was any danger of any kind. But maybe there was a piece of the support that had rotted or whatever. I don't know. They're looking into what caused it, but I'm sure they'll rebuild it better than it was. But at least there were no like life-threatening injuries or anything like that. But yeah, you were fortunate that you weren't there actually at that time.
And so I went down from there to go see the range lights
Hmm.
that are just down the river. And I was expecting I might get there a little early and maybe didn't get a chance to climb them, but they were short lights, so it wasn't going to be the end of the world. And I missed the turn, and I
Hmm.
stopped at a road that I thought was the right turn. And I'm like, wait, no, this isn't it either. And then a car is pulling out of that road, and they go, "Hey, are you looking for one of the lighthouses?" I'm like,
Yeah.
"Yes, in fact, I'm looking for the range lights. Let's look." But that's where we're headed. And it was the two volunteers coming early to open up the range lights.
Well, it's
So
very easy to miss that turn, which is actually more of a driveway. That's not a road. I would call it a driveway onto the property there at the range lights. But it's you can barely call them lighthouses. They're little light structures, the light towers. But I just love that scene. Those river lights along there, I think, are just very peaceful. Usually, I mean, of course, they have storms sometimes, but generally very sort of idyllic, peaceful places, I'd say.
those two little range lights, with that the second one being kind of tucked back in a forest and surrounded on three sides by the trees. It just looking at it from the front range light is just a very unique look that you just don't see it literally any other lighthouse.
Hmm.
But the range light, when you only have to shine in one direction, it works out just fine. And then from there, I went down to Squirrel Point to complete the Aerosec trifecta.
Hmm.
There were a lot of people parked there already when I got there, about just after a little bit after 10 o'clock at the trailhead. And by the time I left, it was even more, just a line of cars on both sides of this little gravel road stretching for it seemed like a mile. And it's a bit of a walk out there. It was
It
a
is.
nice little trail, a little muddy in spots. A couple places I almost lost my footing a little bit from the combination of incline and mud. But it was nice, really nice spot to get out to, and got to meet a couple of the guys from the South Portland AIDS navigation team that were out there to have it open.
It's a nice walk, except if you do it in like July or August, there's a lot of mosquitoes there. I don't know if you experience that,
No
but
mosquitoes, really,
well,
thankfully. I only experienced mosquitoes, I think, one place on the entire trip, and it was they were memorable. They were part of the memorable experience we'll get to.
Okay. Yeah, people like to say mosquitoes are the main state bird, but I think they say that in a few states. So how did Squirrel Point look, by the way?
It looked all right, and they also had the house open. That they've kind of got most of the interiors seem like maybe like 75% done, but enough that you can kind of walk around and kind of see it bare bones, other than the basement. And you can also get a peek inside the boathouse, which was neat since the boathouse is on the incline there, and it has a really odd look because it's very low inside, and then you've got the windows on the sides that are still kind of horizontal, but then at a weird angle to the rest of the building. So a little unique architecture there.
Yeah, yeah. It's very, very pretty there. And I'm glad to see the group there, Citizens for Squirrel Point, is taking care of it, because for quite a while I was kind of in limbo and was neglected a bit.
And I should mention that they're raising funds right now for replacing the footbridge across a little creek that you have to go across to get to Squirrel Point. And not only do they need a new, slightly taller bridge, but also one that's a little longer than the current bridge, because it was one of those things where it's across the water, but there's still mud at both ends. So
yeah,
I would certainly encourage anyone who likes going out there to see that lighthouse to support that.
Yeah, check out Citizens for Squirrel Point online. So let's see, do you continue north from there?
So from there, I had a drive all the way up to Rockland. Got to Rockland Breakwater, and again, parking was a little hairy for that on the day. The weather was really nice on Maine Lighthouse Day. It had changed so totally from the previous couple of days. It was very sunny still, but pleasant. Even occasionally a little breeze. The breakwater out there is fortunately a lot easier, more level, small, without the gaps that you have going to Spring Ledge.
It's a lot longer, but yeah, it is easier to walk on. Yeah.
Yeah, since it was a lot longer, I was really thankful of that. But yeah, there were a lot of people going out that breakwater. Some people that were with dogs and small children and things that I was a little surprised they were taking out in the breakwater. But
yeah. Well, that one I could see that you could take little kids or a dog. You wouldn't don't want to do that at Spring Point Ledge. The one at Spring Point is only 900 feet. The one at Rockland Breakwater is like 7/8 of a mile, but still a million times easier to walk on. The best views of Rockland Breakwater Light, I think, are actually from the water. When you walk out there, you're kind of looking at the rear end of the building, but it's a neat walk. I did it once at sunrise. I always remember that. That was nice.
There's also some nice views I got the next morning in Rockland downtown, kind of by the marina area.
The little park near the Maine Lighthouse Museum, that area, the buoys and stuff.
Yeah, there's some nice views from that. And you can also see there's a couple fake lighthouses from that park too, with the yacht club and a nearby restaurant.
There's the Tradewinds Hotel that has a fake lighthouse built into it. That might be one of the ones you're talking about. Did you make it into the Maine Lighthouse Museum?
I did get to. Oh well, so still on Maine Lighthouse Day. That was a neat lighthouse. I hadn't really seen something with the tower built in. I knew they existed, but I hadn't been to one before. So to see that and get to climb that, and it's really neat being up in that lighthouse right there at the end of a breakwater, because you have all the boats going in and out of the harbor going right by you. So it's about as close as most boats will ever get to a lighthouse, just in their normal passing and coming and going. So that was a little extra feature.
Yeah.
And then I had just enough time to drive around to Owl's Head. I got there at 4:30, and they warned me that based on the rate the line was moving, they couldn't guarantee I'd be able to get up there. I was basically the last person in line to get the climb in that day. And the little lighthouse, but just Owl's Head was one of the ones I liked some of the best on my visit. Great vantage point there from the headland, but also just the combination of the brick and the granite on that lighthouse is a little unique from the other lighthouses I saw.
And you got to meet Bob Trapani, right? Who's the director of the American Lighthouse Foundation, which has their main office there in the house.
Yeah, I got to meet Bob while I was there and for the first time and chat with him a bit. It's always nice to meet another person in the lighthouse community and someone who's been involved in it a while. I'm very similarly passionate about it as we
Yeah.
are.
I'm sure he was a little distracted on Maine Open Lighthouse Day, since he's more than any one person. He runs the show on that day, coordinates all the different lighthouses and the publicity and all that. So he was pretty busy, but I know he was happy to meet you. And they have the little museum there in the keeper's house and a nice gift shop as well.
In fact, one thing that surprised me about this is uh, their lighthouse and the little maritime museum in Kittery that has the Boone Island lens. Those were the only two places in the entire trip where I saw they were selling the T-shirt that has all the Maine lighthouses on the back. I was expecting those to be everywhere, including the Maine Lighthouse Museum. And
interesting. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the museum in Kittery, because we skipped over that. But that is one of the best, most. There's a first order lens in Seguin Light in Maine, but there's unless I'm forgetting something, there's no first order lenses on display in the state of Maine. There's a couple of second orders. There's the second order from Boone Island at the Kittery Historical and Naval Museum, which is certainly worth stopping in. And then you've got a second order at the Maine Lighthouse Museum from Petite Manane. But I was glad we had a chance to stop in the museum in Kittery there. Yeah,
that was definitely worth a little stop. So I did get to see the Maine Lighthouse Museum, which is just a feast for a lighthouse nerd, just because of how many unusual lenses and other optics that were in there.
Mm-hmm.
One of them, and the where the label was placed, it was hard to tell which thing it was actually referring to, but it was listing one of the, I think it might have been Chance Brothers. It was a post Fresnel lens modern optic, but it had been built by a Fresnel lens manufacturing company. I'm like, now we're really starting to blur the lines of what defines a Fresnel lens.
Was it a DCB type aero beacon type light, or something else?
It was a smaller aero beacon.
Yeah, interesting. I don't remember offhand. I haven't been there in a while. I can't remember offhand what that is. But
it was great to see just the many unique lenses there. Petite Manane being one of them there with the giant vertical panels that rotated around the fixed lens. And just seeing a few other things, like they have an example of one of the pressurized kerosene tanks for an incandescent oil vapor lamp, which you don't see those very many places. I'm sure the Lighthouse Service just started pitching them when they didn't need them anymore. A Lyle gun, one of the weights that would be used for rotating a lens they had on display there. So it needs to see some of those things you don't see very much.
Yeah. Also a little exhibit on the history of the flying Santa to the lighthouses. I don't know if you caught that. It's just kind of in a corner, but it's a nice display. I was there for the unveiling of that because I'm involved with the flying Santa. So I'm glad that's there for people to see.
Yeah, it's really a unique part of New England lighthouse history with the flying Santa.
Yeah. So let's see. So did you do any more on the mid-coast there?
Let's see. And I did get to see there's a really nice overlook near Rockport for Curtis Island Lighthouse.
Yeah, actually in Camden, I believe.
But I went down to that and just got a very lovely view of the lighthouse. The weather conditions were just right, even though the fog had started rolling in for the afternoon there. And I did get down to Marshall Point Lighthouse that day. Didn't get to climb it, but it's a very small one.
Yeah. I've been there a million times, but I've never climbed it. I've missed. I was with a group one time. We were supposed to climb it, but the person who was showing us around couldn't find the key, so that didn't quite work out. But it's a beautiful spot. It's another one of the really iconic ones, I think.
Yeah, especially after Forrest Gump made it even more.
Yeah, it was. A lot of people know it as the Forrest Gump Lighthouse. Yeah.
But Marshall Point it's a unique lighthouse there with the just small but just an unusual design. Sitting out on that two types of masonry cylinder. But I was also just fascinated to learn about how it had been turned into a Loran station briefly in the 70s. Also the granite oil house. I think it was the only granite oil house I saw up there. Everything else all the other oil houses I saw were brick.
Yeah, there's a few of those granite oil houses around, but not many. The vast majority are brick. Yeah,
I would have thought in Maine. I guess I would have thought there would have been more of them, but I guess granted it's expensive if it's local.
A nice museum there in the Keeper's House. And I first visited Marshall Point in the 80s when it was all boarded up and abandoned. They had the St. George Historical Society had a sign on the door, "Please help us restore this lighthouse. They're looking for donations, and they've done a great job there. It's so nice to see that.
Very nice job. And anybody going to see Marshall Point, make sure you stop in St. George at the fire station there to see the lovely metal architecture sculpture.
Oh yeah.
Of St. George fighting the dragon.
Yeah, I used to stop. Occasionally I would bring tours up there when I was giving tours in my minivan, and I would always stop there for people to take pictures of that. That is so cool.
I visited West Quaddy. Unfortunately wasn't open that day, and they're closed for a little while with the tower while they fix some stair issues. But it was neat to just get to see one of the more iconic Maine lighthouses, probably one of the more iconic in the country, just because of that day mark.
Yep, the red and white stripes.
Point. I've been to the southernmost point in Key West and the easternmost point in Maine. So one of these days I'll get to the northern and the western points. Maybe not the Alaska one, but
did you get across to Campobello Island from Lubec?
I got across to Campobello, my first time ever leaving the United States. Got my passport just in time for this trip. The Mudholland Point Lighthouse there was neat to see, and then you get some nice views of it from Lubec, so you don't have to go to the Canadian side to see it.
Mm-hmm.
I was fascinated really by the sign they had there about the last Canadian lighthouse keeper, because I'm so used to the American lighthouses where you live at the lighthouse, sometimes in the lighthouse. Yeah. And they're explaining how the last Canadian lighthouse keeper there for decades, he would live 3 miles away on the island and walk to the lighthouse, light it, or turn it off in the morning, go across the river to work in Lubec.
Yeah, in a sardine plant, I believe. Yeah. I remember that. Yeah.
To relight it and walk back home, and especially in the winter, man, that's some. Yeah, it's quite a feat.
Well, most of the Canadian lighthouses had keepers' houses. They lived in the houses, or in some cases inside the lighthouses, the offshore ones, similar to this country. But that was a case where they just had a local keeper commuting from his home.
And the entire time I was in the down east, it was very foggy. A lot of kind of rolling fog. You look at it, and 15 minutes later, it's all still foggy, but it's a different kind of foggy.
Yeah, well, they like to say that the Bay of Fundy is where fog is manufactured.
I believe it. Yeah. So I did go all the way out to the east end there. I knew about the tides. The tides worked out that I was able to go out there to see East Quaddy or Head Harbor Lighthouse. They didn't have it open. They only had the one person at the ticket booth. They didn't have a second person to open the lighthouse that day.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't my favorite lighthouse on the trip by any means, but it was certainly the most memorable one.
Mm-hmm.
So just to put this in picture for the people who like me, who either maybe have an idea of what it is and still don't realize what you're getting into. So you go on this headland where it's really foggy, and then you go down the metal ladder. And I knew about the gravel spit that you have to get across before the tide comes back in on the Bay of Fundy. But then they didn't tell me about the 100 yards of kelp-covered rocks that you have to traverse, which doesn't really have a good trail.
Yep.
Then you go across the gravel spit, up the second ladder, which was a lot more rusty than the first one. Nice mud puddle on the trail at the top of that. But I'm like, okay, at least at the lighthouse in a moment. And then now there's a bridge over to the next headland.
Mm-hmm.
But almost at the lighthouse.
Yeah.
But then there's a third ladder back down to another gravel spit that I didn't know about. And then more rocks to traverse. And I got a nice photo of the lighthouse with its big Red Cross day mark looming out of the fog. Yep. And the foghorn is honking, and there's another foghorn somewhere off to the north and off to the south, and they're in sequence. So you get this honk, honk, honk. And then you get onto the island itself, and that's the one place the mosquitoes were about, and they were big and they were hungry.
Oh, okay.
And I'm like, I have walked into a horror movie.
Yeah, the mosquitoes like that kind of kelp and stuff like that you're talking about. I think they tend to, I don't know, they must breed there. We're talking, in case people missed it, we're talking about Head Harbor Light on Campobello Island, New Brunswick, which is accessible by bridge from Lubec, Maine. And Head Harbor Light, also known as East Quaddy, it's kind of opposite West Quaddy on the Maine coast. But yeah, it's pretty memorable. I've been there a number of times. I've been there in the fog and in a stormy day in the rain where I didn't walk out at all. Only one time, if I walked all the way out to the lighthouse, I was giving a woman from Australia a tour that day, and we walked out there. And there were high school kids staffing the lighthouse, giving tours out there, which I thought was fantastic. I mean, they were good. Do you get to the Roosevelt House on Campobello?
I did take a tour at the Roosevelt House. They weren't very busy. I actually get to be a tour of one.
Mm.
It's a nice little 15-minute tour, and the tour guide was correct. It is the most modest 32-room house you'll ever see.
They also, I've been there twice for a thing they do on certain days where they call it Tea with Eleanor Roosevelt. They tell about her life, and they serve her favorite tea and cookies. And it's a really neat event. I've done that twice. Yeah.
You're not the first person who's recommended that. It's I didn't get to go to it myself, but it's a very popular thing. It tends to book up every day, I think.
So you were up at the top of the Maine coast, way down east, as they say. So then you had to drive back to Boston.
Yeah, and well, and I didn't go back all in one go. So even just driving back to an hour or so up there, the roads in Maine were a surprise for me because turn lanes are not popular, and because they have to scrape so much snow up there, I assume they leave off the reflectors that I'm used to down here. So night driving, quite an experience.
Yeah, I don't particularly like driving after dark. In a lot of New England, actually, but certainly on the northern Maine coast, I think it would be very dark. Yeah.
I spent the next day out on Mount Desert Island. I did get to see a decent view from the loop road of Egg Harbor Rock Lighthouse.
Egg Rock, yeah.
Yeah. Very, very foggy, but back enough to be able to see. In fact, when I was there at one point, there was an excursion boat that was passing right by the island and to stop and bring people closer. It was very foggy on the island, very busy. It was the midweek, a week after Labor Day, but the tourist season was by no means over there.
Yeah. Well, I was just there in late September, and it was still super busy. Yeah.
It reminded me very much of Gatlinburg and the Smokies, but with the ocean, and no Pigeon Forge to be the Kissimmee to Bar Harbor.
Yeah.
I did go down to see Bass Harbor Lighthouse, which I had to wait 15 minutes for the parking lot to just have a space open up. Even though all you do is you just look at the lighthouse, you can't go in anything.
Yeah. Did you walk down the stairs and on the rocks to kind of get that side view? Yeah. Yeah, it's another one of the iconic ones, I think. But to get the view you tend to see on postcards, you got to walk a little bit out on precarious rocks.
Yeah, also I think the trees over the years are starting to grow out a little bit more on that rock side, so it even requires a little more precarious than it used to, 10 or 20 years ago to that view.
My days of doing that are over for sure. Yeah.
If you look just the right way though, from the parking lot there at Bass Harbor, right by the fence, kind of near where the other side that goes down right by the other close up to the lighthouse and the fog bells there, just the right spot, you've got a very nice view of the lantern at Bass Harbor and the lens in there. I got a nice photo from that vantage point of it.
Yeah, it's got a active fourth order Fresnel lens, and that's one of the ones I believe fairly recently where it used to have a red cylinder around it. I believe that was taken away, and there's now a red LED inside the lens. Right, same thing at Nubble Light, same thing at Portsmouth Harbor with the green light. So that's the way things are going with the old Fresnel lenses. They're putting colored LEDs, whatever's needed, inside the lenses, which is cool.
And I did get to see just barely. I found probably the only vantage point in, I think it's Southwest Harbor or what? There's so many harbors there.
Well, yeah, was it Bear Island you're talking about?
Out there on by a little fishing pier, and it's the trees are so tall on the island. It's like you can see the lantern poking above it, but the only thing you really have a good view of is the boathouse.
Yeah, you really need to be out in a boat to have a really good view of Bear Island. Yeah, it's really very picturesque too.
But I would, from this, aside from the lighthouses, from this experience, I would say anybody looking to visit Acadia and Bar Harbor, I would say, just go there for do it like you would go to Gatlinburg. Go there for, several days, stay in town, and just get up at the crack of dawn to try to beat the crowds, and then enjoy the other things in the afternoon on the carriage roads or something where it's less busy.
Yeah, I would recommend May or early June, or I was going to say October, but now I think October is a lot busier than it used to be. So maybe even later October. into early November even. Yeah.
I did see just on a non-lighthouse, the Abbey Museum there in downtown was interesting about the history of the Wabanaki Indians of Maine. Also, just to see how this museum over time has transformed from someone's personal collection into working directly with the tribe, and almost has the feel. It's a history museum that feels almost like an art museum.
Yeah, I've been there. It's been a long time, but it's a neat little museum. Yeah. So then you headed
So
down the coast from there.
after that, continuing on my way back, I got to see Dice Head,
Castine. Yeah.
yeah, in Castine, which I found out the houses there are as expensive as the ones down here in Palm Beach County. So I can certainly understand them using the keeper's house there for their poor preschool teacher.
It was, I think at one time, if I remember correctly, Castine was considered the richest town in America. It's all sea, it's mostly sea captains' houses. So that was a long time ago, but it was up there. Yeah.
It was neat to see the lighthouse, but also the two other interesting things. If you find the right place in town, there's an old British earthwork there from the Revolution, which the parade ground of it is now a baseball diamond and a soccer field. I just thought that was an interesting adaptive reuse of an old fortification.
Of course, the Maine Maritime Academy is right there too.
Yeah. Apparently, it doubles the population of the town when it's in session. And then there's also at least one house in the town that has a turret built on the side of it. Looks like a windmill, complete with the blades. And didn't look like it was functional, but it was a unique bit of architecture. I did stop at Fort Knox. I did not go up the 400-foot observation tower, even if it has an elevator.
Yeah.
But I did see the fort itself, which is the granite fortification. Just having seen so many masonry and forts over the years, it was neat to see the granite, the unique structure.
Yeah, I was there last year. It's a great fort. It's a big fort. Yeah. And if you go back there, do the observatory in the Penobscot Narrows Bridge. That is, I believe, the tallest observatory built into a bridge in the country. That's relatively new. They just rebuilt that bridge maybe 20 or so years ago. But it's on a clear day, it's an amazing view from up there. Yeah.
And probably that was also one of the reasons it was still kind of foggy. But it would have impacted the view a bit. And they have a nice interpretive thing there at the abutment from the old original bridge, talking about the old bridge and the new bridge and everything. So, and I stopped for lunch in Camden on the way back at a place called Bell the Cat, which I just thought was a hilarious name for a deli.
I know the name, but I've never been in there.
And then I did get down to Pemaquid Point, just in time for the massive fog bank to roll through that day. And the seas by this point had turned really stormy. I don't know if it was the approaching tropical storm that was still a couple days out or what, but it's certainly starting to churn up there. Got to climb that one. I actually you mentioned the LEDs that they're putting in all the Fresnel lenses. So I got to see that one up inside and see how it'll actually look up close. Also just their unique little fog signal tower there where they had the weight like they would use to turn a lighthouse, but that drive the striking hammer on the fog signal. And also the 35-pound lobster on display in there.
In the museum. Yeah.
I think I'd take my arm off.
Yeah, the museum it's a kind of a homey little museum there. They call it the Fisherman's Museum in the Keeper's House, run by the town.
And then so that wrapped up that day. And then my last real day in Maine, I went to the Maine Maritime Museum in Bath, which is a great museum, really well done. It's definitely one of those places, I go and I'm taking notes on, future site improvements here back in Florida, to copy some of their ideas. I really love the Cape Elizabeth lens display. It's such a unique, the original Franken lens, I suppose.
Yeah, it's an unusual lens. It's kind of truncated, but it's a nice exhibit they built around it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's certainly a highlight of the visit, but just all of the, I spent 3 hours there, and if I hadn't been on a time crunch, I could have easily stayed for another hour or two to see more things.
Yeah.
The full scale monument, it's not the complete hull, but the outline of the largest wooden schooner ever built.
Yep.
I was really amused by the model of the Carroll Deering being built on that property back in 1919, because it's I used to be really interested in the Bermuda Triangle and things like that. So being there and seeing the model of one of the most famous Bermuda Triangle ghost ships was amusing. And then just a great view of the Bath Iron Works, and you've seen they've got another destroyer in the dry dock getting ready to go. And stopped into the little exhibit they have there about the Bath Iron Works, which is it's always interesting when corporations produce exhibits that are clearly produced by their marketing department, but just the video to see how they build these destroyers in 3 parts, and then pull them out on these crawlers that can almost move the space shuttle, and then weld them together and add the superstructure and floating the dry dock out there and just letting the ship go that way instead of sliding down the ways like they used to with the wooden ships. It was all just very, very fascinating part of modern shipbuilding that I'd never thought about.
I haven't seen that exhibit. I should check that out. But the Bath Iron Works, I believe, is the largest employer in the state of Maine, actually run by General Dynamics. Yeah.
And also just to see some of they've got some interesting waterfront exhibits too down in the town and downtown. Nice little downtown. And just seeing the incredible number of wooden shipworks that used to be there in the 1800s. Now it's just Bath.
Bath was known as the city of ships, still is. Yeah. And
seeing Doubling Point, lighthouse from the dock there at the Maritime Museum. It's always neat to, like I said earlier in the trip, look at where you're going to be, and then look at where you've been from once you get there. And there's some neat exhibits too, neat signage in the downtown Bath area where the river is, and it's just the different aspects of how the river was so important for the business and the livelihoods and the environment, and
the Kennebec. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but the Kennebec River we're talking about, right? Yeah.
Just interpreting it that way, and working for an organization up here that Waxahachie River Historical Society. The river defines our region, is in our name. It's seeing another area that how they interpret the centrality of the river to their history was really neat. Most of the people listening, have never worked at a historical society or a museum, but I'd say that once you do, you can look at other museums and interpret things a whole new way, and just you start seeing it through a completely different lens than you do as just a casual tourist.
Well, I know you're not a casual tourist. I know that being a historian, you're into a lot of detail, which is great.
And I did get to see one final lighthouse on my way out of Maine, from the top of Mount Agamentus, I think Agamenticus in York. Yeah. They just recently fixed up the parking lot and things there. All the fog from the down east was gone. It was a wonderfully clear day. You can't see Nedick too well because of the trees and the houses and things. But I got a nice photo of Boone Island, 13 miles away out there to see.
You must have a good zoom.
I swear by Canon PowerShot, unpaid promotion there. For a little point and shoot zoom camera, I've really enjoyed a decade with it.
Yeah. Well, I love Boone Island. I always tell people it's not one of your prettier lighthouses, but it's one of the more interesting ones, being on a pile of granite about 7 miles from the nearest point on the mainland. Yeah.
Yeah, just that cold, stark granite tower on this cold, dark rock. I'm just, man, imagine being a lighthouse keeper there.
Celia Thaxter, the New Hampshire writer who was the daughter of a keeper in the Isles of Shoals, in one of her books called Boone Island, the forlornest place that could be imagined. So I always think of that description, which is pretty accurate, I think. Yeah. So then was it back to Boston from there?
Yeah, wrapped it up from there with a short time in the Boston area and flying out just ahead of the tropical storm. Ended up seeing over 20 lighthouses, probably just almost all of them that you could either visit or see from land. I'll have to come back on one of your cruises in the future to see more of them.
Yeah, we just did the cruise out of Bar Harbor that saw 21 lighthouses, and some overlap with what you saw, but a bunch of offshore lighthouses that you haven't seen. So maybe you'll get up here to do, I hope we do at least one of those, maybe a couple of those next year. Don't know for sure yet, but maybe you can make it up for one of those sometime. So overall, your impression of your first trip to Maine?
It was a very enjoyable trip. I enjoyed seeing the lighthouses and seeing a very different state. And
Yeah.
I only saw, probably about 5% of it. Maine is a big state, and it's got a lot of coast in it. It's got even more inland. So
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's bigger than the rest of New England put together. People don't realize what a big state it is, but a lot of inland Maine is just wilderness still. There's not a whole lot. You go inland, there's a few little towns, but there's not a lot there. Most of the population is on the coast, in the southern part of the coast. You go up north past Acadia National Park, there's not a whole lot of people living up there.
even just getting past the Brunswick Bath area, it really felt like I was almost going into another country. Not just just how not just how rural it was compared, for the most part, compared to the rest of it, but just other than Dunkin' Donuts and occasional McDonald's, all the familiar things that I'm used to from the rest of the country had all been left behind.
Yeah. Rockland and Camden are pretty substantial communities, but there's not no other big towns around there.
And of all the places that I've gone in my vacation travels, it's certainly Maine is just the most local restaurants and little motor lodges, and that just as the tourist experience is very different in Maine than it is in almost any other state, unless you really try hard. One
of the slogans of Maine is "It's the way life should be." So I used to do these local cruises out of Kittery with a captain on a little tour boat out of Kittery, and I would help him narrate sometimes. And we'd cross the border from New Hampshire into Maine. Of course, I live in New Hampshire, and he liked to look at me and say, "Now we're in Maine, the way life should be," like he was aiming that at me. But it's a great state. I love Maine. I love the Maine coast so much. So I'm glad you got to experience it. The time has flown by here. We've talked for over 45 minutes. It's hard to believe. But it's fun talking with you because, like I said, you pay so much attention to detail. You're not a casual tourist, which I love. But in addition to looking at all the details, I think you had a lot of fun too, which is great. Anyway, thanks for talking with me today, Josh, and we'll be doing it again soon, I'm sure. You've been on the podcast a few times, and I'm sure there'll be many more times. So thanks so much.
Thank you, and thank you, Jeremy, for the tour and all you do.
You can learn more about Josh Liller's home base at Jupiter Inlet Lighthouse in Florida by visiting jupiterlighthouse.org. Josh also has a Facebook page at facebook.com/JoshLillerHistory.
This episode was so much fun to do. I felt like I was seeing our New England lighthouses through new eyes. I hope these interviews might inspire people to go out and visit lighthouses or simply to visit interesting places near where they live. You don't have to be a world traveler to have adventures. You just need curiosity and a love of exploration. Find the best hiking trails near your home, take a tour of a historic house, or visit a local history museum. And if you have a local lighthouse, maybe get involved as a volunteer so you can help others discover its history.
American author John Steinbeck once said, quote, "People don't take trips, trips take people," unquote.
Next week, we'll hear another interview I recorded on my recent road trip in Virginia and North Carolina about the old Cape Henry Lighthouse, one of the oldest in the country. With that, to all our regular listeners and our new ones, thanks so much for listening, and
keep a good light.
I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.